Oh, wow. Thank you so much. Wow. You guys, thank you so much. Wow. This is crazy. I love you too, individually, every single one of you. Wow, can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Great, boy, there's so many of you. I was in backstage trying to figure out whether I should wear my glasses that allow me to see you or that allow me to see me. And all I can see is that there's a lot of you. So I chose the latter. Thank you so much for being here. I love Texas. I love Houston. I love this city every time I come here. First of all, just between us, do not quote me. It is always fun to visit kind of a blue dot in a red state. It's fun. There's energy. Everybody knows what the stakes are. But also, I just love that Houston has always had a little swagger. And I've always really felt at home here, so I'm grateful to be here. And because we are in this beautiful synagogue, everybody thinks I'm Jewish. I'm not. I'm Catholic, but my name is Rachel, and it's, I don't mind it being a mistake. But I will say we have a tradition in Catholic Mass where when there's a moment, we've heard the homily and everything, and then you turn to your neighbor and you say, "Peace be with you," and you shake hands. And we're not doing anything other than a secular book reading here today, but I do like that moment. So would you all mind just saying hello to the people next to you, just saying hi? If there's anybody you didn't know already, just introduce yourself, just say hi. This is a nice place to make friends. Listen, y'all have one thing in common at least, right? Okay. Ooh, I just lost my place. All right, so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna read a little thing from the book, and then I'm gonna say a little thing, and then I'm gonna talk to Randall, and then we've got some questions from you guys. So that's how it's going to go. And it's all very dark, and I apologize in advance, but y'all know why. So here we go. Okay. He was one of the most successful and celebrated industrialists on the planet. His anti-Semitism was rank and it was unchecked. He spewed it freely in private tirades among friends, family, close business cohorts, newspaper reporters, or pretty much anybody within earshot. In the office, in private chats, in interviews, at dinners, even on camping trips. A close friend wrote in his diary after witnessing one late night round the campfire diatribe, quote, "Ford attributes all evil to Jews, or to the Jewish capitalists." Henry Ford even ordered his engineers to forgo the use of any brass in his Model T automobile. He called brass a, quote, Jew metal. Ford said, "Wherever there's anything wrong with a country, you'll find the Jews on the job there." He blamed a vast and inchoate Jewish conspiracy for inciting his workers and his stockholders to demand that he share any more of the expansive Ford Motor Company profits with them. He blamed Jews for the gold standard. He blamed Jews for the advent of the Federal Reserve Bank. He blamed Jews for ruining motion pictures in America. Henry Ford blamed Jews for ruining popular music. He blamed Jews for ruining baseball. And Henry Ford was hardly the only radical anti-Semite in the United States circa 1920. But in addition to his fortune and his famous name and his iconic automobile company, he had a megaphone that your average crazy uncle theorizer lacked. He had a newspaper called the Dearborn Independent, which he bought for a song in 1918. The paper was a big money loser in the beginning, with poor to middling circulation. Ford's own editorial harangues did little to draw new readers in. How many attacks on the man who beat Ford in the most recent Michigan US Senate race did the public really want to read about? Oh, but Truman H. Newberry had stolen that election. One of the Independent's editorial staffers was a veteran of New York tabloid newspaper wars, and he had an idea. He wrote to Ford's right-hand man, "Find an evil to attack. Let's find some sensationalism." And lo, the answer landed unbidden not long after. A newly translated English edition titled "The Protocols of the Meetings of the Learned Elders of Zion." The pamphlet was the work of rabidly anti-Semitic Russian fabulists who were mad at the Bolsheviks toppling the old Tsarist aristocracy. The Tsarists portrayed the Russian Revolution as not just a local affair, it was the early innings of a plot by a cabal of all-powerful Jewish schemers to take over the world. The Protocols was billed as the product of a surreptitious note-taker who was present at a top-secret meeting wherein these Jewish puppet masters had drawn up their strategy and tactics in detail. Now, there was no secret meeting, obviously. There was no secret plot. There was no surreptitious note-taker. The whole thing was a work of fiction, a very considered, very deliberate lie, and a very, very dangerous piece of propaganda. Henry Ford and his newspaper bore down on it with glee. They started a new weekly series in the Dearborn Independent based on the Protocols. It would end up being a 92-part weekly series. Every week for 92 weeks, headlines like these ran in Henry Ford's paper. "The International Jew, the World's Problem." "Jewish Jazz, Moron Music," becomes our national music. "The Perils of Baseball, Too Much Jew." These headlines were splashed onto the pages of Ford's paper, which was distributed in Ford Motor dealerships across the country. Ford also sought to the publication of this series in book form. It was titled "The International Jew," and it ran to 4 volumes. Never mind that the Protocols had been exposed as make-believe in 1921, which was somewhere right in the middle of Henry Ford's anti-Semitic 90-something part newspaper series. Even after it was exposed as a fake, Ford's weekly International Jew essays continued without pause, and Ford Motor dealers kept tossing the latest issue of the Dearborn Independent onto the front seat of every newly purchased Model T in the country. Ford saw to it that the book version, the 4 volumes of the International Jew, were translated and published worldwide, 12 international editions, including one in German, and stick a pin in that. Of all the contributions Henry Ford made to this world, one of them was this oeuvre, the most prolific, most sustained published attack on Jews the world had ever known. The German edition of Ford's book had landed in the hands of one particularly gifted propagandist. When Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf was published in 1925, he appeared to lift not just ideas, but whole passages from Henry Ford's publications. The first edition of Mein Kampf extolled Henry Ford by name. It said, "It is Jews who govern the stock exchange forces of the American Union. Every year makes them more and more the controlling masters of the producers in a nation of 120 millions. Only a single great man, Ford, to their fury, still maintains full independence." Hitler, by this point, had already mulled sending some German shock troops to major American cities to aid in what he hoped would be Ford's run for the presidency in 1924. When a reporter from the Detroit News showed up at Nazi Party headquarters in Munich in December 1931 to interview Hitler, she had a series called 5 Minutes with Men in Public Eye. When she sat down to interview Hitler and looked around his office, she was surprised to find hanging on the wall behind Hitler's desk a large framed portrait of Henry Ford. Hitler explained to the newspaper woman, gesturing at his portrait of America's most famous anti-Semite, he explained to the reporter, quote, "I regard Henry Ford as my inspiration." The reporter asked Hitler that day why he was anti-Semitic, and he said without hesitation, "Somebody has to be blamed for our troubles." So the great thing about conspiracy theories is that they are undisprovable. They don't require facts to prove them, and you are not allowed to use facts to disprove them. And why is that? Because it's a conspiracy. It's secret. It's a secret plan. We are not allowed access to the real facts. And so therefore, there are no facts that can be brought to bear on that discussion. That means that anybody who does bring facts to the conversation is suspect, right? Oh, that's just what they'd want you to believe. The real truth we're not allowed access to. This is a very handy dynamic, right? Because it means that reason and rational argument can't win. It also means the conspiracy can be anything. Just let your mind run wild. Make it as lurid and exciting and dark and sexy and elaborate as you want. Whatever revs you up, whatever gets your blood pumping, that can be it. It can't be disproven, so just go with your gut. Maximize the emotional charge that you get out of it. And once you have done that, feel free to unlock yourself from normal politics, because if you think about it, if it really is a secret conspiracy that's controlling the economy, that's controlling disease and healthcare, that's controlling the government, that's controlling the justice system, then there's no point in thinking or working logically about how to improve those things, right? There's no reason to engage constructively with, filling potholes in your town, or getting the quality of your drinking water protected, or protecting people from a novel virus. There's no reason to work logically and in a principled, constructive way on anything the government is supposed to do. There's no use in trying to get the government to fix stuff if the government is just window dressing, if there's really an evil, unaccountable cabal, a deep state cabal that's secretly really pulling the strings. Conspiracy theories are designed to up the power of emotion, to reduce the power of reason, and to disempower you as a citizen. You just focus on the cabal, right? Focus on the one shadowy enemy that must be behind all the things that are wrong. And once you do that, you have laid the grounds for fascism, even in a modern state, right? The fascists' line to the public always sort of follow the same contours. This place, this nation used to be great, but now it is no longer great. It's been weakened by our enemies within, who are secretly powerful, who are pulling the strings. They frankly have stolen this place. They've left the real people of the real nation on the outside and powerless. And are we going to take our country back? We have to fight to save our country, to make it great again. But how do we fight? Well, these internal enemies. You've heard these terrible, lurid stories about them. They're so bad, they're so evil, they're so powerful. Normal measures will be ineffective against them. We need to do something radical. We need to break some rules. We're certainly not going to handle this with normal politics. They've rigged the normal politics. No use using the political system. We're going to need to use other means. That's how it works. And then you're there, and then we're here. So in a moment like this, why spend time worrying about history, telling stories from history at a time when the news of the day is so alarming on so many days? The reason that I have been spending my time doing this is that for me, this has turned out to be kind of a cheat sheet. Just because this stuff it keeps happening, and it always happens it's not never exactly the same, but it's always in a sort of similar way. Democracies do not fall exactly the same way, but they do fall to exactly the same kind of guy, making exactly the same kind of appeal about lost greatness and the enemy within and the need to be tough and break the rules and all of it. It's always the same thing. So yes, our politics right now has that in spades, and that is alarming, but it shouldn't necessarily be surprising. We are going through something that is a recurrent thing, both around the world and, it turns out, here in our country too. And that's not great, but it does mean we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time it comes up. Here's an example. You all know how our 2020 election ended. We all remember that. Exactly 100 years before our 2020 election, in Bologna, in Italy, politicians on the left won a regional election. And Mussolini and his fascists decided that they did not like that election result and they were going to reject it. And so they stormed the council building, they rioted, they killed 9 people, and it worked. The council was suspended, and that basically negated that election and made it so the center-left had not won. By the following year, by 1921, flush with that success in Bologna, they were doing it everywhere. And by then they had scaled it up. Opposition and left politicians were no longer, it wasn't just that they weren't being allowed to take their seats when they were elected, they were starting to be physically attacked. When they'd show up for their seats in parliament, they'd be physically run out of parliament. Their homes were burned down. And the important thing that happened there in Italy was not just that there was a violent movement on the far right. It was not just that Mussolini was the kind of man he is and the kind of leader that he was, telling the kind of tales he was telling. The important part of that was that the state couldn't stop it. The state was unable or unwilling to stop the violent extremist right from using violence to get their way instead. Whether or not the government really wanted to stop them, the whole country took a look at what happened there and said, oh, our government appears to be powerless to protect political rights, to protect the political process and the people who are participating in it. And once the state proves to be weak, it gets overrun by the emboldened forces that have been able to push it to unimaginable edges. But also, support for the state collapses, because who wants to stand up for something so weak and feckless? That Bologna attack happened in 1920. They started physically attacking individual opposition politicians in 1921. By 1922, the fascist groups in Italy marched toward Rome. And they did not mount a coup because they did not have to. Italy's king just handed Mussolini the government and named him prime minister because who was going to stop him? Better to side with him instead. And Mussolini tried to look like a normal politician for a couple of years, but it didn't stick. By 1924, he had murdered the head of one of the main opposition parties, and then he just cut to the chase, outlawed all the opposition parties, and abolished elections. The fascists were formed in Italy in 1919. Nazi Party was founded in Germany in 1920. Protocols of the Elders of Zion was published in the United States at that same time. Henry Ford immediately starts reprinting it in his newly purchased Dearborn Independent. By 1933, Hitler is the Chancellor of Germany. In 1933, a man named William Dudley Pelley forms a gigantic anti-Semitic armed fascist militia in the United States called the Silver Shirts. By 1940, France is falling to Germany. Italy has joined the Nazis in World War II. And here in the United States, the wife of Charles Lindbergh, the famous pilot, her name was Anne Morrow Lindbergh, she's just published a new book called The Wave of the Future. Her book is all about how fascism is the glorious future for all of us. And it was the #1 book in the country for that year. These winds blow the same for us here in this country as they have in other countries. We are not immune. We are exceptional in lots of ways, but not this one. And the upside of that is that we can learn from this history in other countries, and we can learn from our history contending with it here. And maybe we should, because now we really do have another political movement on the right in this country that is trying to get rid of our electoral system and our legal system and to make us more like the authoritarian regimes that they admire abroad. So some of the things that, there's a lot to learn. I'm looking forward to taking your questions and talking to Randall about this, but I will just say a few things that I have learned here from doing this work. We are not immune to these kinds of movements. These movements in our country have not just been fringe kooks. They've been some of the most powerful people in the country, including the most famous industrialist in the country, Henry Ford, the most famous celebrity and national hero in the country, Charles Lindbergh, the man who was the face of American sports in the world, Avery Brundage, the head of the American International, the Olympic Committee, in 1936. The biggest media titan in the country at the time was Charles Coughlin. All of the most powerful people in all of these incredibly important sectors were all totally on board with America's pro-Nazi fascist movement in the lead up to World War II. So it's not that we have never faced very powerful people with these bad ideas before. We have. Also, you can learn from our experience of this and from other countries' experience of this, that political opposition matters. Political opposition is often very difficult against movements like this, but it matters. And so does the political process. Democracy is a process. It is a system of rights and protections from tyranny. What the Italians learned in the early 1920s, what we are learning right now, is that if we do not fight to protect the specifics of that process, we will lose that process. The rule of law and democracy are not abstract things. They are human processes run by regular folks, including many people in this room. If we don't protect the process, we will lose it. The danger on the right in this country right now is not that they are running against the Democratic Party, it is that they are running against the democratic process. And that has consequences for us. It's not just a scare, it's not just a thing to say to scare one another. It means that the people who participate in the democratic process need our protection. We are not in a civil war. We are not facing mass violence in the streets. We are not taking up military arms against one another. Instead, they are picking people off one by one. Elections workers, witnesses in trials, judges, prosecutors, family members of those people, individual opposition politicians. They're picking them off one by one and terrorizing them. It's terrible for those people, but it also gives us our marching orders as a democracy, which is to protect those people. We need to protect the press. We need to protect the judiciary and the court system. We need to protect opposition politicians. We need to protect the people who are being scapegoated. We do have a cheat sheet from history for how to do this. I think if we choose to learn it and to let it help us, it can help us. But honestly, I think we need to learn it fast because it is past time to start building the barricades. We here in this room right now, here in Houston, we are alive and sentient at a time when there is an ascendant ultra-right in this country that is linked to the most powerful people and forces in politics, and it includes right-wing armed paramilitary groups and the denial of election results and mass disinformation and conspiracy theories and intimidation targeting minorities and Jews and the political opposition, and weirdly, it involves big, hot, sexy crushes on foreign authoritarian leaders. It also involves the use of force and violence to affect political outcomes. We are living it. That is a diagnostic of our time. For our descendants, for the next generations of Americans who come after us, what we do now in a time like that is what they are going to learn about us. What do you want to be able to brag to your grandkids about? What do you want to be able to tell people that you did in your country when you were here and alive when all this happened? It is not a lucky thing to live in an important time, but this is an important time. Thank you.